What's a great technique that you can use that will help you overcome your everyday fears, unfamiliar situations, and your anxieties? Hello everyone, my name is Sunsi from the Mind Council, and today I'm going to be presenting you the technique that you can use in everyday life that's going to help you overcome your fears and your anxieties. This is not magic, but it's a practical everyday solution that you can utilize, which will help you to properly manage your fear, your anxiety, and any stressful situations that you may be facing. So before I jump into this technique and tell you all about it, let's briefly talk about what anxiety is and what it can do to your body. Anxiety is a mental health condition that nearly everybody will go through at some point in their life. However, nearly 4% of the world's population suffer from persistent anxiety or persistent anxiety disorder. Therefore, it's important to remember that if you are going through anxiety that is persistent and you are struggling to manage it, you are definitely not alone. Now, anxiety can be caused by a number of different reasons, but usually it's something that triggers when we are presented with a trigger. Now, there's a reason that I'm using that terminology. Anxiety triggers cause anxiety. Anxiety can manifest itself in many different ways. Usually, anxiety comes around when we are triggered by something. And these triggers can be found in everyday life in a variety of different situations. It could be a medical condition, it could be uncertainty in your family life, in your love life. Anything can trigger an anxious episode. And when these anxious episodes happen, we tend to have specific signs and symptoms that affect us. Usually our stress increases, we undergo physical changes, we undergo mental health changes. We can become very panicked, we can have a panic attack, we can have an increased heart rate. It may even have us tense up, feel edgy, have pulled muscles, especially around the neck and back area, and inhibit us from sleeping properly. So anxiety is something that can affect us profoundly if we don't learn how to manage it. Anxiety can also be something that is inherited, and a lot of people are not aware of this, but it can be something that is passed down from generation to generation. If you have family members who are very anxious, who are more prone to anxiety, then you are more likely to be anxious as a person yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of times other disorders and other mental health issues go hand in hand with anxiety. Now that could be PTSD, OCD, it can be depression, it can be extreme stress. All of these things can go hand in hand with anxiety. Therefore, it's very important that we identify our anxiety triggers and we learn how to manage them. There are many different techniques where we can use to learn to manage our anxiety. There's many different therapy options available to you if you would like to know more about managing your anxiety, and I will discuss these in ongoing videos. But today I want to focus on a specific technique that should be able to help you to manage everyday stressful and anxiety-filled situations. Just before I start that, and I know you guys are waiting patiently for that, I would like to also point out that diet has a massive effect on our anxiety levels. And you're probably thinking, how can that be the case? Well, let me explain to you. We have a hormone in our system called cortisol. When we have a high level of this hormone, it can cause havoc in our bodies. It can create autoimmune conditions. Heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes also result from an increased level of cortisol in our bodies. Therefore, it's very important that we learn to manage this stress hormone and other stress hormones. This is where diet plays a key role. Now, I know that everybody loves coffee and tea. We are a nation of tea lovers, and usually people can't go a day without having at least one drink of coffee or one drink of tea. However, you may not realize how much this is actually damaging your health, especially if you have anxiety. Caffeine massively increases cortisol levels in the body, which leads to increased anxiety. It's a stress hormone. So when you are taking your daily coffee or your daily tea and you're already an anxious person, you're actually going to be increasing your level of anxiety and creating even more stress on your already stressed out body. Therefore, it's probably better if you try decaffeinated versions of your favorite hot drinks or your favorite cold drinks. This way, not only will you help to manage your anxiety and calm it down, you're going to also help your long-term health in general. Now, another drink that increases our anxiety levels is alcohol. Now, I know that a lot of people like to take alcohol for social, recreational purposes. However, you could be doing more damage than good to your body. And in the long term, alcohol increases your anxiety by increasing your cortisol levels, just as caffeine does. And it can damage major organs over time with a high level of stress and high level of anxiety on your body, in particular your thyroid. And it can lead to conditions with the thyroid. It can lead to immune system problems, amongst a host of other things to do with the liver, the kidneys, etc., etc. So I highly recommend that you decrease your level of alcohol at the very least, and if you can, cut it out altogether, and it will massively help you to control your anxiety levels. Now, the last thing, and I know a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this, but sugar. Believe it or not, sugar massively increases cortisol levels. And if you have a sweet tooth and you maybe like your shot of caffeine and you maybe like alcohol, all of these things combined are creating the perfect whirlwind for anxiety to take a hold of you. So therefore, cut down on your sugar consumption as much as you can. Keep it to an occasional treat, and you will see a big change in your anxiety levels. Now, getting on to the technique that I was talking about. This may seem very basic, but it's very, very helpful. So I want you to start keeping a diary. And in this diary, I would like you to write down every time you feel triggered or you feel anxious. And then we're going to analyze these triggers. And what do I mean by that? Basically, we're going to break down each trigger and we're going to come up with a plan on how to manage each trigger. Now, you've probably heard or read that avoiding anxiety triggers is a great way to overcome anxiety. However, all this is doing is prolonging the inevitable. And yes, you may have short-term success where you avoid a trigger and you don't become anxious, but in the long term, it's only going to cause more damage than harm, because you never really learn how to deal with the trigger. You only learn how to ignore the trigger for a short period of time. So if the trigger comes back in a different form or twice as big, you're not going to know how to handle it, especially if you cannot ignore it or avoid it. Therefore, it's very important that we learn how to analyze and break down our triggers so we can see how we can manage each and every single trigger. I want you every single day that you feel triggered and feel anxious about something, I want you to write down exactly what triggered you or what you are feeling anxious about. Now, this could be an ongoing anxiety issue, in which case you will write down what is making you anxious that day. Maybe it's your finances, in which case I would like you to put down your finances. Maybe it's something that happened that day that triggered your anxiety or made it worse. So say, for example, somebody crashed into the back of your car. I know this is a big example, but I want you to write it down anyway. Even if it's a tiny thing, maybe your boss threw something on you at the last minute at work and said, I want this completed by tomorrow, and that raised your anxiety levels or gave you anxiety. Now, I want you to write that down. Next thing I want you to do is to write, why am I anxious about this? Now, this may seem very obvious and you probably even know the answer to this, but I want you to write it down anyway, because when we write things down, it helps us to rationalize and think logically about things rather than letting our emotions overtake us. I'm going to work this into an example so it's easier for me to break it down. So say, for example, you are going for a new job interview. I'm going to use this example to show how I would use this strategy to break down this anxiety trigger. Obviously, when everybody is going for a job interview, they're nervous, but for when someone is already living with an anxiety disorder, it can make things 10 times more difficult. So after I write down the trigger, which is job interview, underneath that, I'm going to put, why am I anxious about this? Now, you can put your own reasons, but for my reasoning, just to give it as an example, I'm going to say, because I really want this job, I need this job, and I'm worried that I'm not going to get it. Which seems like a reasonable explanation of why I would be anxious about going for a job interview. Now, the next thing I'm going to put is, what steps can I take to change this situation? Now, there's usually two options to this. Can I do something about it, and can I do nothing about it? So in this situation, can I do something about it? Yes. So I'm then going to move on to the next part. If you find yourself underneath that and it's like there's nothing you can do about the situation that you are feeling anxious about, then you really need to think about whether or not it's worth feeling anxious about. Logically, think about it. If you have done everything you can and there's nothing more that you can do to change the situation, will worrying about it change the situation? Will worrying about it make the situation better? Will feeling anxious make the situation better? Yes or no? If the answer is no, which I'm sure that's the answer that's going to be, then you need to let go of the situation as much as you can. You need to learn that you cannot control the situation and just resign your control away and see what happens. Important to remember, worry is like a rocking chair. It doesn't go anywhere, it just takes you backwards and forwards. Therefore, being anxious about something is not going to add to your situation. In fact, it's going to make it worse. Therefore, if you come down that little step-by-step guide that I'm giving you and it comes to there's nothing I can do about the situation, the best thing that you can do is step away, because then your brain is not constantly trying to figure an out. Your brain is constantly not trying to figure out what the solution is when there is no solution. At least then you've got an answer to give to yourself that there is no solution right now. I need to let it go. If there is something that you can do about the situation, then you need to move down and take the next step. And I want you to start now detailing exactly what you can do about the situation so you can change it to your favor. So let's just go now into detail on what we can do to take our steps to make sure the situation turns out the best for us and hopefully lower our anxiety with it. So in the case of a job interview, what steps can I take? I need to make a list. Have I got all my documents ready? My CV, any cover letter, any kind of certificates that I have that I can show to them, any kind of evidence, emails from my previous job where I can show how, what problems I had and how I solved it so I can use it as evidence. Have I got my outfit ready for the big day? Do I know what I'm going to wear? Do I know how I'm going to present myself? These are all very, very important initial steps. They may not seem big, but it's massively going to help if I'm preparing myself for the big event. I'm going to do is research the company. So I'm going to research the company. I'm going to find out more about them. I'm going to find out about their history. I'm going to find out about where the company is now, where it would like to be in a couple of years, what I can do to add value to this company. And I'm also going to prepare some mock questions and mock answers of what I may think they might ask me at the interview, so I'm prepared with pretty much nearly any question that they can throw at me, and you can find these online, so that shouldn't be too difficult. Next thing I want you to do is put down, now this is a big one, the worst case scenario and the best case scenario in this situation. Now, if you live with anxiety, you will know that you will nearly always jump to the worst case scenario, so I want you to write it down. Then I want you to put down the best case scenario. And then I want you to put down any other scenario that can happen in the middle of it. So when it comes to a job interview, the worst case scenario is I won't get the job. The best case scenario is I will get the job. And anything in the middle, maybe I won't get the job, maybe I'll embarrass myself, maybe my hair won't look nice, or maybe I'll accidentally drop my pants in the middle of an interview by mistake. Maybe I didn't wear a belt that day, I don't know. Anything in the middle. I then want you to think about the likelihood of each one happening. Now, pants falling down in the middle of an interview, 1 in a billion, 1 in a trillion. Getting the job, 50%, not getting the job, 50%, right? If you've written down the best and worst case scenario, you will see that the worst case scenario usually isn't that bad. Next step is I want you to have a plan for each outcome. So that means if the worst case scenario was to happen, what would I do? If the best case scenario was to happen, what would I do? And I don't want you to worry about the little niggly things in the middle. I just told you those things so you can get your fears out onto a piece of paper and see that usually those fears are completely irrational. So anyway, I want you to think about the worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that can happen? I won't get this job, right? So what am I gonna do if I don't get this job? I'm gonna apply for another job. And I wanna add this tip on for anybody who is looking for jobs. Put a square with 100 dots on your fridge or on a wall somewhere. And every time you go for a job interview, I want you to circle one of those dots or cross it out. And you will see, you won't even reach the end of the paper. You won't even reach the end of that square. You're gonna end up getting a job, I promise you. So it's just to show you, to break things down that, you know, your worst case scenario is probably not gonna happen. In fact, there's 0.01% chance that the worst case scenario will happen. And if it does, what are you gonna do to overcome that worst case scenario? I want you to have a plan. This way it will calm down your anxiety, knowing that you're always gonna have a contingency, you're always gonna have a backup plan. There's always a way out. And that's exactly what your brain is looking for, a way out of every situation. It's looking for a way out of the anxiety, which is why it's making you feel anxious, because usually we cannot see the way out, and that's what makes us very anxious. So, and then I want you to think of the best case scenario. What am I gonna do if the best case scenario happens? Okay, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna go and get this job. I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna enjoy myself, and I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna turn it into a career. I'm gonna exceed in this career. This is the best case scenario. After we've broken down the best and the worst case scenarios and gone into details about contingencies and what will happen, and, you know, gone into more detail about that, the next big step that I want you to take is come back after a couple of days, weeks, whenever. Obviously keep documenting each and every trigger, but maybe come back to this trigger and evaluate, look over the trigger, go back through your steps and see, was the anxiety worth it? Was the anxiety worth it? Did the problem resolve itself? Did the steps that you took help with the problem? And I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, the majority of the issues that you're facing will either resolve themselves, you're gonna find a way out. It's never gonna be, you know, 9 times out of 10, not gonna be worst case scenario, and you will see that when you actually have everything written down. And you will start to rationalize, your own mind will start to rationalize that jumping to worst case scenarios, having all of this anxiety brings me no real benefit. I'm gonna work through every single problem that I'm facing, and I'm gonna write it down and see what outcomes I can come up with. And that way, not only will it help my brain to rationalize a way out, it's gonna help it to stop feeling so anxious with each and every situation. Work through it slowly, precisely, methodically, logically, and you're gonna find your way out. And evaluating ourselves is one of the biggest things that we can do. It's a great way for us to be more critical of ourselves. It's a great way of us to see, and you will see in your past experiences, I'm sure you've had points in your life where you've been extremely anxious about something, and then 2 weeks later, a year later, you know, the problem has resolved itself and you're not even thinking about it anymore. This is why having a diary that you can look back on is gonna remind you of every single problem that you had and how you overcame every single problem. Not only will it help to increase your confidence, it's going to give you a different perspective on each and every scenario that you might face in your life. It may even help others if you can show them, this is how I dealt with this and this is how you can deal with this. It may even be that you come through a similar situation going forward in your life and you look back on your diary and you're like, well, I handled this really, really well then. How can I change this? What can I do to maybe, you know, modify this chart a little bit and see, you know, how I can handle the current situation that I'm going through? So it's a great little exercise for you to do. It's a great little way for you to break down all of your problems, issues that you're facing, and see whether or not you can do anything to change them. And like I said before, if you can't do anything to change them, then the best thing to do is come back after a short while, reevaluate the situation, re-look at the trigger, re-look at the anxiety that you were having about this situation, and see, was it worth being anxious over? Is there anything I can do about it now? Is there anything I can do to change it now? And maybe you'll come up with a solution a week, 2 weeks down the line. So constantly reevaluate your triggers. Don't be afraid to face your triggers. Don't be afraid to break down your triggers and realize that that's all that they are. They're triggers. We decide how we're going to handle every single situation. So we decide if we're going to handle it in a logical manner and how we're going to come through a situation. So that was it. That was the tip that I have today for you in terms of helping to manage your anxiety. If you have any further questions, if you have anything to add, maybe you have a tip that you would like to share yourself, please mention it in the comments below, and please share this video if you think it's going to help somebody else. Please rewatch it if you think you could benefit from it again, and like and subscribe to the Mind Council's channel, and I will be back in the future with more tips to help you deal with your anxiety and everyday issues that you may be facing. Thank you so much. Have a good one.